I never thought the people I raised would be the ones to lock me out of my own home. That sentence keeps playing in my mind even now as I sit here in this small apartment, watching the rain slide down the window. It's funny how life turns out sometimes. You give everything you have to your children thinking you're building something strong, something that will last forever. But then one day, you realize that the foundation was made of sand all along, and the tide has come in to wash it all away. My name is Margaret. I'm 72 years old now and I've lived a long life full of ups and downs like anyone else's. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened 6 months ago. When I think back on it, I can still feel the shock, the disbelief, the way my heart seemed to stop beating for just a moment when I heard those words from my own son's mouth. "Mom, we think it's time you moved out." Just like that. Told. Final. As if I were a tenant who'd overstayed her welcome, not the woman who'd built that estate from nothing, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table after their father died, who'd sacrificed every dream she ever had so they could have theirs. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning because this story, my story, it deserves to be told properly. It deserves to be understood. Not for sympathy and not for revenge, but because there's a lesson in it somewhere, buried beneath all the pain and disappointment. A lesson I'm still trying to understand myself. I married young. 20 years old, fresh out of secretarial school, full of hope and dreams about the future. Thomas was 23, handsome in that quiet way that made you feel safe just standing next to him. He worked construction and he was good at it. We didn't have much money back then, but we had each other and somehow that felt like enough. We had 3 children. Robert came first, then Victoria 2 years later, and finally Daniel, our surprise baby who arrived when I was 37 and thought we were done having kids. They were my whole world. When Thomas died suddenly of a heart attack when he was only 48, those kids became more than my world, they became my reason for breathing. I remember the day of Thomas's funeral like it was yesterday. Robert was 24 then, already working in sales. Victoria was 22, just finishing college. And Daniel, my baby, was only 11 years old. Too young to lose his father. Too young to understand why life could be so cruel. That night, after everyone had gone home and the kids were finally asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and Thomas's life insurance papers. It wasn't much. Enough to bury him properly and maybe cover a few months of expenses if we were careful. I did the math over and over, hoping the numbers would somehow change, but they never did. I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to let my children suffer because their father had died. I wasn't going to let them give up their dreams or feel like their lives had to stop just because we'd lost Thomas. I would do whatever it took to keep them safe, to keep them moving forward. So I worked. God, how I worked. I kept my secretarial job during the day, started cleaning offices at night, and on weekends I worked at a local diner. There were times when I'd go 36 hours without sleep, when my feet hurt so bad I could barely stand, when I'd cry in my car between jobs because I was so tired I couldn't see straight. But I never let the kids see that. To them everything was fine. Better than fine even. I made sure they had what they needed for school, made sure there was always food on the table, made sure they could still do their activities and see their friends. Robert got to go to the college he wanted. Victoria studied art history like she'd always dreamed. And Daniel, he got to stay a kid a little longer, playing baseball and going to birthday parties like nothing had changed. Years passed like that. Hard years, but good ones too. I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I learned that love could carry you through almost anything. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to build something. When I was 50, a small piece of land came up for sale on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 5 acres of overgrown grass and old trees, but it was cheap and I saw potential in it. I'd been saving every penny I could for years and I finally had enough for a down payment. I bought that land and I had a vision for it. Took 10 more years, but I did it. I built my estate. Nothing fancy, mind you, but solid. A beautiful main house with 4 bedrooms, wide porches, and windows that caught the morning sun just right. A guest cottage out back. Gardens that I planted myself, spending weekends on my knees in the dirt, coaxing roses and tomatoes and lavender to grow. It was mine. Something I'd created with my own 2 hands, my own sweat, my own dreams. And I always imagined that one day it would belong to my children. That they'd bring their families there for holidays, that my grandchildren would run through those gardens, that the house would be filled with laughter and love for generations to come. The kids were grown by then, of course. Robert had married a woman named Janine, a sleek, polished woman who worked in marketing and always seemed to be looking at everything like she was calculating its value. They had 2 children, Emily and James, sweet kids who I didn't get to see as often as I wanted. Victoria had married a lawyer named Preston. They lived in the city and visited maybe twice a year, usually staying just one night before they had to rush back to their busy, important lives. They had one daughter, Sophie, a quiet little girl who seemed afraid of everything. And Daniel, my baby, he'd married a kind woman named Lisa. They lived closest to me, only about 30 minutes away, and they came to visit almost every week. They had 3 kids, all boys, and those boys loved coming to Grandma's house, loved running through the gardens and climbing the old oak tree by the pond. For a while everything seemed perfect. I was 65, finally able to slow down a little, finally able to enjoy the life I'd worked so hard to build. I'd retired from my jobs and I spent my days tending my gardens, reading books on the porch, cooking big Sunday dinners for whoever could come. But then little things started to change. Small things at first, so small I barely noticed them. Robert and Janine started visiting more often, but the visits felt different somehow. Janine would walk through the house, making little comments about the furniture, about how certain rooms could be better utilized, about how much work it must be for me to keep up such a big property at my age. "You know, Margaret," she said one afternoon, sipping tea in my kitchen like we were old friends, "Preston was just telling me that properties like this, they're really appreciating in value right now. If you ever thought about selling, you could probably get quite a lot for it." I laughed it off at the time. Why would I sell? This is my home. I'm planning to die here, probably in that garden while I'm planting tulips or something. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Of course. I'm just saying it's something to think about. You're not getting any younger, and taking care of a place like this, well, it's a lot for one person. Victoria started calling more too, but the calls always seemed to circle back to the same topic. How was I managing the property taxes? Was the maintenance getting to be too much? Had I thought about what would happen to the estate when I was gone? "You really should have a clear plan, Mom," she'd say in that serious voice she used when she was being the practical one. "Estate planning is so important. You don't want us kids fighting over things after you're gone, do you?" "I'm not gone yet," I'd remind her, trying to keep my voice light. "And I have a will. Everything's taken care of." "Yes, but wills can be complicated," she'd insist. "Maybe you should meet with Preston, let him look things over professionally, just to make sure everything's in order." Even Daniel, sweet Daniel, who I thought understood me better than anyone, started acting strange. He and Lisa would come for Sunday dinner, and I'd catch them looking around the house like they were seeing it for the first time, whispering to each other when they thought I couldn't hear. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. Like I was being watched, evaluated, assessed for my usefulness. Then came my 70th birthday. The kids threw me a party at the estate, a big one with all the grandchildren and a few old friends. Should have been wonderful. The weather was perfect, the gardens were in full bloom, and there was so much food and laughter. But halfway through the party I went inside to get more ice and I heard them. My children. All 3 of them sitting in my living room talking in hushed voices. "We need to do something soon," Robert was saying. "She's not getting any younger, and frankly she's not capable of managing a property like this anymore." "I know," Victoria agreed. "Did you see how the guest cottage needs painting? And some of those garden paths are becoming trip hazards. What if she falls and breaks a hip? We could be liable." "It's not just about liability," Janine's voice cut in. "It's about being realistic. She's 70 years old, living alone on 5 acres. It's not safe and it's not practical. We need to convince her to sell, or at least to sign the property over to us so we can manage it properly." I stood there in the hallway holding a bag of ice that was slowly freezing my hands, and I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what I was hearing. "I don't want to just take it from her," Daniel said, and I felt a small flicker of hope. "She built this place. It means everything to her." "Sentimentality doesn't pay property taxes," Robert shot back. "Look, we're not being cruel. We're being responsible. Mom had her time here. Now it's time for the next generation to take over. We can sell it, split the money 3 ways, and Mom can move into one of those nice senior communities. She'll be safer there, have people around her own age. It's the right thing to do. The right thing to do." The words echoed in my head as I quietly set down the ice and walked out the back door, away from the party, away from my children who were planning my future like I was already dead and buried. I spent the next hour walking through my gardens, touching the roses I'd planted, sitting by the pond where Thomas and I had scattered flower petals on our 25th anniversary. This place held every memory that mattered to me. Every sacrifice, every triumph, every moment of joy and pain and everything in between was woven into the very fabric of this land. And my children wanted to take it away from me. After the party ended and everyone went home, I sat in my bedroom for a long time just thinking. I could confront them, tell them what I'd overheard, but what would that accomplish? They'd probably deny it, or worse, try to convince me they were right, that I was being unreasonable. So I decided to wait. To watch. To see what they would do next. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Robert called and asked if he could come over to talk about something important. He arrived with Janine, both of them dressed like they were going to a business meeting. They sat on my couch, the one I'd bought at an estate sale 20 years ago, and lovingly reupholstered myself, and they laid it all out. "Mom, we've been talking," Robert started, his voice gentle in that condescending way people use when they think you can't understand complex things. "We're worried about you here all alone. This house is too big, the property is too much work, and we think it's time to consider other options." "What kind of options?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Well," Janine leaned forward, her smile practiced and perfect. "We've been looking at some wonderful senior living communities. Places where you'd have your own apartment, but also activities and people around. No more worrying about maintenance or lawn care or any of that. You could just relax and enjoy your retirement." "I am enjoying my retirement," I said quietly. "Here. In my home." Robert sighed like I was being difficult. "Mom, be reasonable. What happens if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency and no one's around to help? We can't live in constant fear that something's going to happen to you out here." "I have a medical alert button," I pointed out. "And my neighbors check on me. And Daniel visits every week." "It's not enough," Janine said firmly. "And frankly, Margaret, we need to talk about the financial side of things too. This property is worth a significant amount of money. Money that could be ensuring your care for the rest of your life, and money that could help your children and grandchildren." There was the truth beneath all the concern and worry. They wanted the money. "I see," I said softly. "And if I don't want to sell?" Robert and Janine exchanged a look, one of those married people looks that communicates a whole conversation without words. "Then we'll have to explore other options," Robert said carefully. "For your own good, Mom. For your own safety." I asked them to leave. Told them I needed time to think about it, even though I already knew there was nothing to think about. This was my home and I wasn't going anywhere. But they didn't stop. Over the next few months, the pressure increased. Victoria started sending me articles about elderly people who died alone in their homes, been found days later by neighbors. Robert brought by a lawyer friend who tried to talk to me about power of attorney and guardianship. Janine showed up with glossy brochures for retirement communities, all of them costing more per month than my mortgage payment. And slowly, subtly, they started excluding me from family events. Birthday parties I wasn't told about. Sunday dinners that happened without me. When I called to ask why I hadn't been invited, I got vague excuses. "Oh, we thought it would be too much driving for you. It was just a small thing, very last minute. We didn't want to bother you." I was being punished for not giving them what they wanted. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was in my garden planting the early spring vegetables when I heard cars pulling up to the house. Lots of cars. I walked around to the front, dirt still on my hands and knees, and found all 3 of my children standing on my porch with a group of people I didn't know. "Mom," Daniel said, and he looked uncomfortable, couldn't quite meet my eyes. "We need to talk." Inside. My heart was pounding as I led them all into my living room. Robert, Victoria, and Daniel sat on one couch. Janine and Preston sat on chairs they'd pulled in from the dining room. And the strangers, 2 men in suits and a woman with a clipboard, stood near the fireplace. "Margaret," one of the men started, "my name is Richard Davidson. I'm an elder care attorney. Your children have asked me to come here today because they're concerned about your welfare and your ability to continue living independently." "My ability," I repeated slowly, "to live in my own home. We've tried to do this the easy way, Mom," Robert said, and now he sounded frustrated, angry even. "We've tried to talk to you reasonably to help you see that this is the best choice. But you won't listen. You're being stubborn and selfish." "Selfish," I whispered. The word hit me like a physical blow. "You're thinking only about yourself," Victoria added, her voice rising. "Not about us, not about the grandchildren, not about your own safety. Do you know what it's like for us, constantly worrying about you out here? Do you know what a burden you're placing on us? A burden. My children, the ones I'd sacrificed everything for, thought I was a burden. Here's what's going to happen, the lawyer said, his voice businesslike and cold. Your children are prepared to pursue legal guardianship if necessary. They have documentation from your doctor expressing concerns about your memory. They have testimony from neighbors about some incidents that suggest you may not be capable of caring for yourself. What incidents? I demanded. What are you talking about? Last month you left your stove on, Janine said. Robert had to come over and turn it off. You could have burned the house down. I went outside for 5 minutes to get the mail while water was boiling, I protested. The stove was on because I was cooking. And you've been forgetting appointments, Victoria added. You missed your dentist appointment in January. I rescheduled it because I had a cold, I said, my voice shaking now. This is insane. You're twisting normal everyday things into evidence that I'm incompetent. Mom, please, Daniel finally spoke up. We don't want to take you to court. We don't want to force this. Just sign the papers. Sign the property over to us, let us sell it, and we'll make sure you're taken care of. We'll find you a nice place to live, somewhere safe. This is my home, I said, and I could hear my voice breaking. I built this. Your father and we bought this land. I put every penny I had into this place. I worked 3 jobs to give you kids everything you needed, and I never complained, never asked for anything in return. And now you want to take this away from me? We're not taking anything, Robert said coldly. We're helping you face reality. You're an old woman who can't take care of herself anymore. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone. I looked at my children, these people I'd grown inside my body, nursed at my breast, rocked to sleep, bandaged when they fell, comforted when they cried. I'd taught them to read and write and ride bikes and be kind to others. I'd gone without food so they could eat. I'd worked myself to exhaustion so they could have opportunities I'd never had. And this was what I'd raised. These cold, greedy strangers who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between them and money. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, Daniel started. Get out of my house, I said louder, standing up. All of you. Get out right now. You're making a mistake, the lawyer warned. If you force us to pursue legal action, then pursue it, I said, my voice steady now despite the tears streaming down my face. But until a judge tells me I have to leave, this is still my property and I'm telling you to get off it. Now. They left, but not before Robert turned at the door and said words that would haunt me. This isn't over, Mom. You can't stop us. One way or another, we're getting what we deserve. What they deserved. As if they deserved anything from me. As if I owed them more than I'd already given. I spent that night going through old photo albums, looking at pictures of my kids when they were young. Robert holding a trophy from his first baseball game, his smile so wide and genuine. Victoria in her prom dress, beautiful and excited about the future. Daniel as a baby, sleeping on Thomas's chest, both of them looking so peaceful. Where had those children gone? When had they become these people who could look me in the eye and call me a burden? The next morning I called the only person I trusted anymore. Her name was Rosa, and she'd been my cook and housekeeper for the past 5 years. I'd hired her initially just to help with the heavy cleaning once a week, but we'd become friends. She was in her 50s, a widow like me, and she understood what it meant to work hard and sacrifice for the people you loved. Rosa, I said when she answered, I need your help. I need to make sure my children can't take my house away from me. He came over that afternoon and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her dark eyes full of sympathy and anger on my behalf. You need a good lawyer, she said finally. Not one of those corporate types your daughter's husband knows. You need someone who will fight for you. She gave me the name of her cousin, a lawyer named Marco who specialized in elder law and estate planning. I called him that same day and made an appointment. Marco was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. I told him everything, showed him the papers my kid's lawyer had left, explained about the threats of guardianship. He was quiet for a long time after I finished, just sitting there looking at his notes. Finally, he looked up at me. Mrs. Margaret, I'm going to be honest with you. Your children can make this very difficult. If they pursue guardianship, they'll need to prove you're incompetent, but the bar for that isn't as high as you might think. A few doctor's notes about memory issues, Some testimony from people saying they're worried about you. It could be enough to at least freeze your assets while the case is pending. My heart sank. So I'm going to lose my home? Not if we're smart, he said with a small smile. Not if we act now while you're clearly competent and capable of making your own decisions. We need to protect your assets in a way that your children can't challenge, and we need to do it quickly. How? I asked. There are several options, he explained. A living trust is one. You transfer ownership of the property to the trust, but you remain the trustee and maintain complete control as long as you're alive and competent. If someone tries to claim guardianship, the property is already protected. But then what happens when I die? I asked. Won't they just inherit it then? That depends on how you structure the trust and what you put in your will, Marco said carefully. You can leave your property to anyone you choose, Mrs. Margaret. It doesn't have to be your children. The idea was shocking at first. Not leave my estate to my kids? But then I thought about how they'd treated me, about how they'd called me selfish and a burden, about how they'd threatened me in my own home. I need to think about this, I told Marco. Over the next few weeks I did a lot of thinking. I also paid attention to who actually cared about me, not about my property or money, but about me as a person. My children didn't visit, didn't call. I was invisible to them now that I'd refused to cooperate with their plans. But Rosa came every week like always. She cooked my favorite meals, sat with me while we drank tea, listened when I needed to talk. She'd been through her own betrayal when her husband died. His family had tried to take everything from her too, and she understood the pain of being abandoned by people who were supposed to love you. You deserve better than this, she told me one afternoon as we sat in the garden. You deserve peace and happiness, not this constant stress. I just don't understand what I did wrong, I said, wiping away tears. I gave them everything. Where did I go wrong in raising them? You didn't do anything wrong, Rosa said firmly. Sometimes people just become who they become regardless of how they were raised. You showed them love and sacrifice, but they chose to see it as weakness instead of strength. That's on them, not you. Her words gave me comfort but also clarity. He was right. I'd spent months trying to figure out what I'd done to make my children turn on me like this, but the truth was I hadn't done anything. They'd made their choices, shown their true characters, and now I needed to make my own choices. I called Marco and told him I wanted to set up the trust. I also told him I wanted to change my will. I want to leave my estate to Rosa, I said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Margaret, I need to make sure you understand what you're doing. If you disinherit your children, they will contest the will. It will be ugly. Let it be ugly, I said. Rosa is the only person who's treated me with love and respect. She's the only one who's been there for me without expecting anything in return. If anyone deserves to inherit what I've built, it's her. All right, Marco said. Then let's make sure we do this properly so it can't be challenged. We spent the next month setting everything up. The trust, the new will, all the documentation that would protect my wishes. Marco was thorough, making sure everything was witnessed and notarized, that there was clear evidence of my competence and my intentions. I didn't tell Rosa what I was doing. I wanted it to be a surprise, though I worried sometimes about how she'd react. What if it was too much? What if she didn't want the responsibility? But every time I saw her, the way she cared for me and my home with such genuine affection, I knew I was making the right choice. My children, meanwhile, made good on their threat. 3 months after our confrontation, I received papers informing me that they were petitioning the court for guardianship based on concerns about my mental capacity. The hearing was scheduled for 2 months away, and Marco assured me we'd be ready. They're going to argue that you're forgetful, that you're putting yourself in danger, that you're not capable of managing your affairs, he explained. We're going to show that you're sharp as a tack, that you're living independently with no problems, and that their real concern is financial, not your well-being. The stress of it all took a toll on my health. I lost weight, wasn't sleeping well, spent too many nights lying awake wondering how my life had come to this. Rosa noticed, of course, and she started staying over more, keeping me company, making sure I ate. You're going to get through this, she'd tell me. You're stronger than they know. I hoped she was right. The court hearing was one of the worst days of my life. My children sat on one side of the courtroom with their lawyers, looking concerned and sorrowful, like they were reluctant heroes forced to save their poor, incompetent mother from herself. I sat on the other side with Marco and Rosa, my hands shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. They called witnesses. A doctor who said I'd seemed confused at an appointment, though he admitted under cross-examination that I'd simply asked him to repeat something because I hadn't heard him clearly. A neighbor who testified that she'd seen me walking around my garden at odd hours, talking to myself. Though Marco got her to admit that lots of people talk to themselves and that I'd always been kind and coherent when she'd spoken to me. Then Robert took the stand. He talked about how worried they all were, how I'd become forgetful and stubborn, how I wasn't taking care of the property properly. He talked about the incident with the stove, making it sound like I'd nearly burned down the house rather than just having a pot of water boiling. "We love our mother," he said, and he even managed to make his voice crack with emotion. "We just want what's best for her. We want her to be safe." When it was our turn, Marco called me to the stand. I was terrified, but I held my head high and answered every question clearly and carefully. Yes, I lived alone. Yes, I managed my own finances. Yes, I sometimes forgot small things like anyone my age did, but I'd never missed paying a bill or forgotten to turn off the stove or done anything that put myself in danger. "Mrs. Margaret," Marco asked, "why do you think your children are pursuing guardianship?" I looked at my kids sitting there in their expensive clothes and I told the truth. "Because they want to sell my property and take the money," I said quietly. "They've made that very clear to me. This isn't about my safety or my well-being. It's about control and finances." The judge asked some questions, reviewed all the evidence, and then said she'd issue her ruling within a week. Those were the longest 7 days of my life. I barely ate, couldn't focus on anything. Rosa stayed with me the whole time, just being there, providing comfort. When the ruling came, Marco called me immediately. "She denied the petition," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. The judge said there was insufficient evidence of incapacity, and she noted in her ruling that the petitioners appeared to be primarily motivated by financial concerns rather than genuine concern for your welfare. I cried with relief. I'd won. My home was still mine. But the victory felt hollow somehow. I'd won in court, but I'd lost my children in the process. They didn't call after the ruling. Didn't apologize or try to reconcile. They just disappeared from my life completely. Months passed. I celebrated my 71st birthday quietly with just Rosa and a few old friends. The grandchildren didn't come, didn't even send cards. I'd been erased from their lives as completely as if I'd died. It hurt more than I can describe. I'd lie awake at night thinking about all the birthdays and holidays we wouldn't share, all the moments I'd miss in their lives. I mourned the relationships I'd thought we had, even though I was starting to realize those relationships had maybe never been real in the first place. Rosa kept me going through those dark months. She moved into the guest cottage, said it was easier than driving back and forth, but I knew she was really just worried about leaving me alone too much. "You're not alone," she'd remind me. "You have me and you have friends and you have this beautiful place you built. That's more than a lot of people have." She was right, but it didn't stop the loneliness from creeping in sometimes, especially late at night when I'd hear a sound in the house and instinctively want to call one of my kids, only to remember I couldn't. Then, on a cold February morning just a few weeks before my 72nd birthday, I had a heart attack. I was in the garden, of course, because that's where I always was. I'd been planting some early bulbs, thinking about how beautiful they'd look in the spring when the pain hit me. Sharp, radiating from my chest down my arms, stealing my breath. I managed to press my medical alert button before I collapsed. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital with Rosa holding my hand, tears streaming down her face. "You scared me," she said. "You scared me so much." The doctor said I'd been lucky. The heart attack was mild, but it was a warning. I needed to take better care of myself, reduce stress, make some lifestyle changes. I spent a week in the hospital and then Rosa took me home and fussed over me like I was made of glass. She made me healthy meals, made sure I took my medications, sat with me in the garden on good days and read to me when I was too tired to go outside. My children didn't come to the hospital. They didn't call. Rosa had contacted them, told them what happened, and they'd sent flowers with a generic card that said, "Wishing you well." Nothing more. That's when I really knew that they were gone from my life for good. A mother has a heart attack and her children send flowers like she's a distant acquaintance. That told me everything I needed to know about what I meant to them now. But I also realized something else during my recovery. I'd spent so much time grieving the children I thought I had, the family I thought we were, that I'd failed to appreciate what I did have. I had Rosa, who'd stayed by my bedside, who'd cried when she thought she might lose me, who cared for me without expecting anything in return. She was more family to me than my blood relatives had ever been. I called Marco after I'd been home for a few weeks and was feeling stronger. I want to make sure my will is ironclad, I told him. I want to make absolutely certain that Rosa gets everything, and that my children can't contest it. We did good work before, Marco assured me. But if you want additional protection, we can add some elements. A letter of explanation, video testimony, medical evaluations proving your competence. The more documentation we have, the harder it will be to challenge. So that's what we did. I wrote a long letter explaining my decision, detailing not out of spite but out of love for the one person who'd truly cared for me. I made a video with Marco, clearly stating my wishes and my reasoning. I had a psychological evaluation done that confirmed I was of sound mind. And I didn't tell Rosa any of it. I wanted her to just be my friend, my companion, without the weight of knowing what I planned to leave her. Spring came and the bulbs I'd planted before my heart attack bloomed beautifully. I was recovering well, getting stronger every day, and I was starting to find a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Then on a sunny afternoon in April, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked terrible. Older than his 41 years, tired, like he hadn't slept in days. He asked if we could talk and I let him in, though my heart was pounding. We sat in the living room and for a long time he didn't say anything. Just sat there looking around the room like he was seeing it for the first time or maybe for the last time. "I'm sorry, Mom," he finally said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything. For what we did, for what we said, for not being there when you had your heart attack." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately, to pull him into a hug and tell him it was okay. But it wasn't okay and I needed to hear more. "Lisa left me," he continued. "She said I'd become someone she didn't recognize, someone greedy and cold. She took the boys and moved back to her parents' place. She said I'd learned to value money more than people, and she wasn't going to let our sons grow up thinking that was okay." He started crying then, really crying, and I just watched him, this grown man who was still my baby boy despite everything. "She was right," he said. "Robert and Victoria and Janine, they got in my head. They made it all sound so reasonable, like we were doing the right thing. But we weren't. We were being selfish and cruel, and I'm so ashamed, Mom. I'm so ashamed of what we did to you." "Why did you do it?" I asked quietly. "Why did you all turn on me like that?" Daniel shook his head. "I don't know. I mean, Robert and Janine, they've always been about money and status. And Victoria, she's always followed Robert's lead. But me, I don't have any excuse. I got caught up in it, in the idea of all that money, and I forgot what really mattered. I forgot about you, about how you sacrificed everything for us." We talked for a long time that afternoon. He told me about how miserable he'd been, how guilty he'd felt, how he'd been too proud and too afraid to reach out. He told me that Robert and Victoria were already planning how they'd spend their inheritance, that they talked about me like I was already dead. "I don't want to be like them," Daniel said. "I want to be the son you deserved. I know I can't undo what we did, and I know you probably can't forgive me, but I needed to tell you I'm sorry. I needed you to know that I know how badly we messed up." I looked at my youngest child and I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. I saw the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to pick dandelions for me and present them like they were roses. "I forgive you," I said softly. "But Daniel, things can't go back to the way they were. You hurt me too badly for that. You all did." "I know," he said. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. And that I love you, even though I did a terrible job of showing it." After he left, I sat for a long time thinking about forgiveness and family and what we owe each other. I'd forgiven Daniel because I could see his remorse was real. But I also knew that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean everything was suddenly fine. The damage was done. The trust was broken. And some things once broken can never be completely repaired. A few months later, in July, I was in the garden with Rosa when I started feeling odd. Dizzy and weak, like I couldn't quite catch my breath. Rosa helped me inside, called 911, and once again I found myself in an ambulance. This time it was a stroke. Mild, the doctor said, but still serious. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and when I came home I was different. Weaker. Older. I needed help with things I'd always done myself. Rosa became not just my friend but my caregiver. She helped me get dressed, made all my meals, assisted me in the garden when I felt up to it. She did it all without complaint, with love and patience that brought tears to my eyes. Daniel came to visit a few times. He'd been trying to rebuild our relationship, taking small steps, not pushing too hard. He brought the boys once and it was good to see them even though things were awkward. Robert and Victoria never came. Never called. As far as they were concerned, I was already gone. I started feeling like maybe it was time to get my affairs in order, really in order. The stroke had reminded me that I wasn't going to live forever, and I wanted to make sure everything was settled. I called Marco and asked him to draft a final version of my will, incorporating all the protections we'd discussed. I wanted everything signed and sealed, no room for doubt or challenge. "You're doing the right thing," Marco assured me. "Rosa has earned this, and you have every right to leave your property to whoever you choose." The will was completed in August. I signed it in Marco's office with witnesses present, and then I put it in a safety deposit box at my bank. I also gave Marco a copy and told him that when the time came he was to handle everything. I still didn't tell Rosa. I wanted her last months or years with me to be about our friendship, not about money or inheritance. Fall came and I continued to recover from the stroke. I was never quite the same, never as strong or independent as I'd been, but I could still enjoy my garden, still sit on my porch and watch the sunset, still feel grateful for the life I'd lived. In October, on a particularly beautiful afternoon, I asked Rosa to sit with me on the porch. We drank tea and watched the leaves change colors and I felt a deep sense of contentment. "Rosa," I said, "I want you to know how much you've meant to me. How much your friendship and love have meant to me, especially these past few years." "You mean everything to me too," she said, squeezing my hand. "You're like the mother I lost, like the family I've been missing." "That's good," I said. "Because you're family to me too. The only real family I have left." We sat there in comfortable silence and I thought about how strange and unpredictable life could be. I'd raised 3 children who'd turned their backs on me, but I'd found a daughter in the woman I'd hired to clean my house. Family, I realized, isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you without conditions or expectations. Winter came and with it my 72nd birthday. Rosa made a small celebration, just the 2 of us and Marco, who'd become a friend over the years. We ate cake and laughed and I felt happy in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I was tired though. More tired than I'd ever been. I napped frequently, spent more time in bed than I liked. The doctor said it was normal after a stroke at my age, but I could feel my body slowing down, getting ready for the end. I wasn't afraid. I'd lived a good life, a full life. I'd loved deeply and worked hard and built something beautiful. Yes, I'd been disappointed by my children, but I'd also found Rosa, and that had made everything worthwhile. In February I caught pneumonia. It started as just a cold, but at my age, with my weakened heart and the damage from the stroke, it quickly became serious. I spent what I knew would probably be my last week at home in my own bed with Rosa by my side. Daniel came to visit, sat with me, held my hand, told me again how sorry he was. "I know," I told him. "I forgive you, Daniel. I want you to live a good life, be a good father to your boys, be the man I raised you to be." Robert and Victoria didn't come. I didn't expect them to. On my last day I asked Marco to come to the house. I wanted to make sure he understood everything, that he would carry out my wishes exactly as I'd specified. "Rosa gets everything," I reminded him. "The house, the land, all of it. And there's a letter for my children explaining why. I don't want them to wonder. I want them to know that I made this choice because Rosa was the one who truly cared for me, who loved me without wanting anything in return." "I understand," Marco said. "And I'll make sure everything is handled properly." After he left, I asked Rosa to help me out to the garden one last time. It was cold, but the sun was shining and I wanted to see my flowers, even though most of them were dormant for winter. She bundled me up and helped me to my favorite bench by the pond. We sat there together and I looked at everything I'd built, everything I'd created with my own hands and heart. "This place has been my greatest joy," I told Rosa. "Every flower, every tree, every stone in these paths. I put my whole soul into this land." "It's beautiful," Rosa said. "And it will always be beautiful, I promise you that." I knew what she meant, even though she didn't know yet that it would be hers. Somehow, I think she understood that I'd taken care of her, just as she'd taken care of me. That night I went to sleep in my own bed in my own home with Rosa in the next room. I felt peaceful, ready, grateful for everything I'd experienced. I didn't wake up. "They found me in the morning looking peaceful," Rosa said later. She'd come in to check on me and knew immediately that I was gone. The funeral was small. Rosa arranged everything just as I'd wanted. Some old friends came, a few neighbors. Daniel came with his boys. Robert and Victoria showed up, dressed in black, looking appropriately somber. But the real drama came a week later at the reading of the will. Marco called everyone to his office. Robert, Victoria, Daniel, and Rosa. They all sat there in his conference room, probably expecting to hear how my estate would be divided 3 ways among my children. Marco read through the formalities and then he got to the important part. I leave my entire estate, including the house, land, and all assets, to Rosa Martinez, in recognition of her loyalty, love, and care during the final years of my life. The silence in that room must have been deafening. Rosa started crying, overwhelmed. But my children, Robert and Victoria, exploded. "This is impossible," Robert shouted. "She can't do this. Mom wasn't in her right mind. We'll contest this." "You're welcome to try," Marco said calmly. "But I should inform you that Mrs. Margaret took extensive precautions to ensure this will withstand up to any challenge. She was evaluated by medical professionals who confirmed her competence. She made video testimony explaining her reasoning. She has letters documenting her thought process. And most importantly, she was very clear about why she made this decision." He handed each of them a copy of my letter. The letter where I explained that I'd left everything to Rosa because she was the one who'd truly loved me, who'd cared for me without wanting anything in return, who'd been more of a family to me than my own children had been. Victoria read it and started crying, but not tears of sadness. Tears of rage. "This is because we tried to help her. Because we were concerned about her safety." "No," Daniel said quietly. He'd been silent until now, but he spoke up. "This is because we were greedy. Because we called her a burden and tried to take her home away from her while she was still alive. She didn't do this to punish us. She did it because Rosa earned it." Robert and Victoria stormed out, threatening lawsuits and investigations. But Daniel stayed. He walked over to Rosa, who was still crying, still in shock, and he hugged her. "Take care of this place," he told her. She loved it more than anything. Well, almost anything. They did try to contest the will, of course. Robert and Victoria hired lawyers and filed motions and did everything they could to overturn my decision. But Marco had done his job well. Every challenge was denied. Every appeal was rejected. 6 months after my death, the court issued its final ruling. The will stood. Rosa was the legal owner of my estate. He still lives there now in the house I built. She tends my gardens, keeps everything beautiful, and sometimes she tells me she sits on the porch and talks to me, telling me about her day, thanking me for the gift I gave her. Daniel visits sometimes. He and Rosa have become friends, and she lets him bring his boys to play in the garden. She even lets him help with the spring planting, teaching him the things I taught her about coaxing life from the soil. Robert and Victoria never came back. They're still angry, still bitter, still convinced they were robbed of something that was rightfully theirs. But they're wrong. They weren't robbed. They threw away something precious because they valued money more than love, and when they finally realized what they'd lost, it was too late. I don't regret my decision. Not for a moment. Yes, it hurt to disinherit my children. Yes, there were nights when I wondered if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. But in the end, I realized that I had to make a choice between rewarding the people who'd hurt me or honoring the person who'd loved me. And when you put it that way, the choice becomes clear. Rosa earned every inch of that property, every flower in that garden, every sunset from that porch. She earned it with her kindness and patience and love. She earned it by seeing me as a person, not as an obstacle or a burden or a source of money. And my children, they earned exactly what they got. Nothing. I hope they learned something from it, though I doubt it. Robert and Victoria, I think they're too far gone, too wrapped up in their own greed and self-interest. But maybe Daniel learned. Maybe losing his mother and his inheritance taught him something about what really matters in life. I hope so. Because that's the lesson I tried to teach them their whole lives, and it's the lesson I'm teaching them still, even from beyond the grave. Love is not about what you can get from someone. Family is not about inheritance and money and property. It's about showing up. It's about caring for each other without keeping score, without expecting repayment. It's about sitting with someone in their garden on a cold winter day because you know it makes them happy, even when there's nothing in it for you. That's what Rosa gave me. That's what my children failed to give me. And that's why, when my lawyer read my will and named Rosa as the sole heir to everything I'd built, It wasn't a revenge or punishment. It was justice. It was recognition. It was love repaid to the one person who'd given it freely. And if I could do it all over again, knowing everything I know now, I wouldn't change a single thing. Because in the end, I died in my own home, surrounded by beauty I'd created, cared for by someone who truly loved me. And that, more than any amount of money or any number of children, is what makes a life rich. That is what makes a life worth living.